In this video, we're going to complete the KutaSoftware Infinite PreAlgebra free worksheet multiplying binomials. I'll leave a link in the description below so you know how to access this free worksheet. Now, our directions for this worksheet are to find each product. But let's simplify this down a second. Think about if we were multiplying a monomial with a binomial. Then we take the first term, or the only term in the monomial, and multiply it with both terms in the binomial. So essentially the distributive property. However, when we have two terms, we're going to do that same thing except with both terms. So the first term gets combined with both terms in the second, and also the second term gets combined with both terms in the second binomial. So you can see there's 4 different combinations or multiplications that are going to need to be performed in order to multiply these binomials. And there's a simple acronym to help you remember how. And that acronym is FOIL. F-O-I-L. First, outside, inside, last. And all we're going to do is we're going to take the first term of each binomial, combine them through multiplication. Then we'll take the outside term of each binomial. So if you can envision this, the outside terms are the ones on each end. So the outside will be the first term of the first binomial and the second term of the second binomial. Combine those. Then we're going to take the inside terms. Here are 2 inside terms, so combining those. And then lastly, our last terms. So the last 2 terms of our binomial, combining those. So again, FOIL. First, outside, inside, last. So let's jump into number 1, remembering to FOIL. So first term, 3n times n. And we're going to add that to our outside terms, 3n times 3. And then we're going to add that to our inside terms, 2 times n. Remember, I for inside. And then lastly, our last terms, 2 times 3. And I'm adding that because, just like with the distributive property, there was addition between all of these terms, so I know I'm adding everything together. So again, we have, one more time, first, outside, inside, last. Let's go ahead and do out the rest of this math. 3n times n will give us 3n squared, and we'll add that to 3n times 3, which is 3 times 3, which is 9 times n, or 9n. We're going to be adding that to 2 times n, or 2n, and then we're going to add that to 2 times 3, which is 6. Now we need to simplify this down a bit further because if you notice, we can combine these 2 terms, 9n with 2n. If we can combine those, we're going to get 3n squared plus 9n plus 2n is 11n, and then we're adding 6. So you can see that our final solution for number 1 is 3n squared plus 11n plus 6. So remembering FOIL, let's jump into number 2. For number 2, remember FOIL, F-O-I-L. First, outside, inside, last. So we're going to take our first term n and multiply it with our first term 2n. So that's n times 2n. And then we're going to add that to our outside terms, n times 2. But look here, this n is positive, and this 2 is technically negative since it's subtracted. So we're going to do n times a negative 2. And then we're going to add that to our inside terms. So 1 multiplied with 2n, but again, this 2n is positive and this 1 is negative. So that's going to be a negative 1 times the 2n. And then after those inside terms, we're going to do our last terms. 1 times 2, and look, it's a negative 1 times a negative 2 since both are subtracted. So we're going to add a negative 1 times a negative 2. So we're going to get n times 2 times n, which is 2n squared, plus n times negative 2, which is a negative 2n, or minus 2n, plus negative 1 times 2n, which is a negative 2n as well. And then finally, plus negative 1 times negative 2 is a positive 2. Now we can simplify this down by combining our n to the firsts. So we're going to combine negative 2n and negative 2n to give me 2n squared minus 4n plus 2. And there we have it. That's our solution for number 2. Let's move on, continuing this technique, to number 3. For number 3, remember, again, first, outside, inside, last, combining each term in our first binomial with each term in our second. So that's going to be, start with our first terms, 2x times 2x. Then we'll add our outside terms, which will be 2x times the negative 3, since that 3 is subtracted. Then we'll add our inside terms, I, for inside, so that's 3 times 2x. And then we'll add our outside terms, 3 times the negative 3, since that second 3 is subtracted. Simplifying this down, 2x times 2x is going to be 4x squared, plus 2x times the negative 3 is going to be a negative 6x. Then we're going to have 3 times 2x, which is 6x. And then we're going to have 3 times negative 3, which is a negative 9. Simplifying this down, we can combine our negative 6x with our positive 6x. And combining those, we're just going to get 0 since they're opposites. So we're going to have our 4x squared minus 9 as our entire solution. And that's for number 3. Let's move on to number 4. For number 4, remember again, FOIL. That's an acronym to help us combine each of the terms of our first binomial with the terms of the second. So first is r combined with r, so r times r. Then we're going to add our outside, that's r combined with 3, but this 3 is subtracted, so that's going to be r times a negative 3. Then we're going to add that to our inside terms multiplied together, which is 1 times r. And then our last terms multiplied together, 1 times a negative 3. R times r gives us r squared. We're going to add that to r times negative 3, so minus a 3r. Then that gets added with 1r. And then finally, 1 times negative 3 will be a negative 3, or minus 3. Finally, combining the terms that are raised to the first power, the negative 3r with the 1r, we're going to get r squared minus 2r minus 3 as our solution for number 4. Let's move on to number 5. In number 5, starting with the first terms, we're going to do 2n multiplied by 2n. Then we're going to add that to our outside terms. So that's going to be the first term of the first binomial and the last term of the second binomial. So 2n times 1. Then adding that with our inside terms, 3 times 2n. And then finally, our last terms, 3 times 1. And everything was added, so no need to switch any signs up. So we'll get 2n times 2n, which is 4n squared, plus 2n times 1, which is 2n, plus 3 times 2n, which is 6n, plus 3 times 1, which is 3. Simplifying this down, combining my 2n and my 6n, we can get 4n squared plus 8n plus 3 as our final solution for number 5. Moving on to number 6, first, outside, inside, last, FOIL, F-O-I-L. We're going to take our first term, 3p and p, and combine them through multiplication. Then we're going to add that to our outside terms, 3p and 1, But look, this 1 is subtracted, so that's going to be 3p times a negative 1. And then we're going to add that to our inside terms, where this 3 is subtracted, but this p is positive, so it's going to be negative 3 times p. And then finally, we're going to add that to our last terms, where both the 3 and 1 are subtracted, and we need to take that into account, so I'm going to write them both as negatives. Now, simplifying this down, just doing out some math, we're going to get 3p times p, which is 3p squared. That gets added to 3p times negative 1, which is a negative 3p, or subtracting 3p. And again, we have a negative 3 times p, so we're going to be subtracting 3p again. And then we're going to be adding that with negative 3 times negative 1, which is a positive 3. Lastly, I just have to combine these two terms where p is raised to the first power. So that's going to give me 3p squared minus 6p plus 3 as my solution for number 6. Moving on to number 7. First, outside, inside, last. We're going to get 3p times 3p. Add that to 3p times 2. So far I've done my first and outside terms. Now I'm going to do my inside and last terms. So inside, 3 times 3p. And then last, 3 times 2. Simplifying each of these multiplications down, 3p times 3p, 3 times 3 is 9, and p times p is p squared. We're going to add that to 3p times 2, which is 6p. That will get added to 3 times 3p, which is 9p, plus 3 times 2, which is 6. Finally, simplifying even further, we can combine 6p with 9p because they are like terms. Both are p's to the first power. So we're going to combine those through addition, and we're going to get 6p plus 9p, which is 15p. So we're going to have 9p squared plus 15p plus 6 as our solution for number 7. Let's move on to number 8. Again, FOIL. First, outside, inside, last. That's going to help us remember how to combine these binomials through multiplication. So first terms, that will be k times k, plus outside terms, k combined with 3, where 3 is subtracted. So that's going to be k times a negative 3. Then our inside terms, adding this 2 that's subtracted, multiplying that by k. So that's going to be a negative 2 times k. And then finally adding our last terms, 2 and 3, both of which are subtracted. So negative 2 times a negative 3. And quickly, I want to note that if you can figure out the signs in your head, feel free to write, for example, the second term where we multiplying k with that 3 that was subtracted. Feel free to just write this as subtraction right off the bat, and then you don't have to worry about the negative. But if that's confusing to you, just keep adding each of the terms together, keeping track of whether the term was originally subtracted so you know if it's negative or not. Continuing on by simplifying down, k times k is k squared, plus k times negative 3 is a negative 3k, plus negative 2 times k is a negative 2k, plus negative 2 times negative 3 is a positive 6. So negative 3k plus a negative 2k, since we can combine these since they're like terms, that's going to be a negative 5k. So I'm going to write this as k squared minus 5k plus 6. That's our solution for number 8. Number 9, what are we going to do? We're going to FOIL. First, outside, inside, last. FOIL. So we're going to start with our first terms, v and 3v, by multiplying those together. Then our outside terms, v and 3, where that 3 is subtracted. So plus a v times a negative 3. Then we're going to add that to our inside terms, where 1 is subtracted, so that's going to be a negative 1 times 3v. And then finally add that to our last terms, where again, both 1 and 3 were subtracted, so I'm going to account for that with negatives. Now, let's do out the math. V times 3 times V is 3V squared. And we're going to add that to V times negative 3, or simply just write that as negative 3V. And again, we have another negative 3V, so subtracting 3V. Lastly, adding negative 1 times negative 3, which is a positive 3. Finishing this out, combining 3V and 3V, where both are subtracted, we're going to get 3V squared minus a 6V plus 3. That's our solution for number 9. Moving right along to number 10, FOIL, FOIL, we're going to FOIL. So first term is going to be 2x times 3x. Then our outside term, 2x and 3, both positive, so it's going to be 2x times 3 plus our inside terms, this 3 combined with 3x, where that 3 is subtracted, so it'll be a negative 3 times 3x. And then our last terms, negative 3 and 3. Since the one is subtracted and the other is not, we're going to add a negative 3 times a positive 3. Now all we have to do is work out each of these multiplications, then simplify. So we're going to do 2x times 3x, which is 6x squared, plus 2x times 3, which is 6x, plus negative 3 times 3x, which is going to be a negative 9x, plus negative 3 times 3, which is a negative 9. Now I can write these negatives as subtractions, or I can keep them as adding the negatives, but let's continue to simplify. Because 6x can be combined with negative 9x to give me a negative 3x. So this is going to be 6x squared minus 3x minus 9. And that's our solution for number 10. Let's move on to number 11. And for this, I have a feeling you already know what I'm going to say. That's right, FOIL, F-O-I-L. So starting with our first terms, 4n and 5n. Then our outside terms, 4n and 8, where that 8 is negative, so 4n times a negative 8. Then our inside terms, 4 and 5n, where both are positive, so 4 times 5n. And then finally, our outside terms, 4 and 8, where that 8 is negative, so 4 times a negative 8. Simplifying each of these multiplications and then simplifying the overall expression, 4n times 5n is going to be 20n squared, plus 4n times negative 8 is going to be minus a 32n. Since that's going to be negative, I'll write it as subtracting. Then we're going to add 4 times 5n, which is 20n. And then finally, we're going to be subtracting, since 4 times negative 8 is negative 32, subtracting a 32. Now it's just a matter of combining those two like terms, that 32n, which is negative or subtracted, with the positive 20. And that's going to result in a negative 12. So I'm going to get 20n squared minus a 12n minus 32. And that is my solution for number 11. 20n squared minus 12n minus 32. Let's move on to number 12. Again, FOIL. First, outside, inside, last. First term, 5x and 5x. Multiplying those together. Then our outside terms, 5x and 8, where that 8 is subtracted. So 5x times a negative 8. Then our inside terms, 2 and 5x, where that 2 is subtracted. So negative 2 times 5x. And then finally our last terms, that negative 2 and negative 8. Simplifying this down, 5 times 5 is 25, and x times x is x squared. Then we add that with 5x times negative 8, which will be a negative 40x. So subtracting 40x. Then we're going to be subtracting, since we have a negative times a positive, that's going to be a 10x. So subtracting the 10x. And then finally adding, negative times negative is a positive, so we are indeed adding the positive 16. So combining this, we're going to combine our negative 40x and our negative 10x. Since both are subtracted, we're going to be going further into the negatives or subtracting an even larger number. So that's going to result in 25x squared minus 50x plus 16. For number 13, FOIL. First, outside, inside, last. And to help speed this along, I'm going to do a little bit of this mental math in my head, but feel free to continue writing out every single term. So we're going to combine first, which is 6x and 2x, which is going to be a 12x squared. That's going to get added to 6x times 8, those outside terms, which is going to give me a 48x. Then those inside terms, 2 times 2x, which is 4x. And then finally adding those terms multiplied together, which is 2 times 8, 16. Finally, again, combining those like terms, we're going to get 12x squared plus 48 plus 4, both with an x, 48x plus 4x. That gives us the 52x plus 16. 12x squared plus 52x plus 16 is our solution in number 13. Moving right along to number 14, FOIL. F-O-I-L. First, outside, inside, last. I know it's repetitive, but the more I repeat it, hopefully the more it'll get stuck in your head and you won't forget how to multiply binomials. So first, 3x times x, 3x squared. Then we'll add that to our outside, 3x times 4, which is 12x. Add that to our inside, 3 times x, which is 3x. And then finally add that to our last, 3 times 4, which is 12. Combining the 12x and the 3x, we'll get 3x squared plus 15x plus 12. That's our solution for number 14. Moving right along to number 15, FOIL. First, outside, inside, last. First, 5v and 3v, that's going to be 15v squared. Then, outside, 5v and 6, that's going to be 5v times a negative 6, which is going to be a negative 30v. Then we're going to add that to inside 4 and 3v, which is going to be 12v. And then finally last, 4 and a negative 6. 4 times negative 6 is a negative 24. So here's something. Notice that if you're underlining as you go through, each of these will be underlined twice if you've combined them all together, because each gets combined one time with the terms in the binomial. So combining it with 2 separate terms, it's going to get combined 2 times. Now, simplifying, we're going to get 15v squared minus an 18v minus 24. Let's move on to number 16. For number 16, first, x and x squared, plus our outside terms, x and the negative 7, so that's going to be negative 7 times x. Then our inside terms, negative 4 and x, so negative 4x. And then our last terms, negative 4 times negative 7, which is a positive 28. Combining our negative 7x and our 4x, we're going to get x squared minus 11x plus 28. Moving along to the second to last problem on this worksheet. If you've been finding this video helpful so far, don't forget to give me a thumbs up by clicking that like button. But for now, let's keep moving on. FOIL First, outside, inside, last. So first terms, 5x and 8x, is going to give me a 40x squared when multiplied together, plus 5x times a negative 4 is going to be a negative 20x. So I will be subtracting 20x. And then our inside terms multiplied together, 6 and 8x, that's going to be a positive 48x. And then finally our last terms, positive 6 with a negative 4, that's going to be negative 24 when multiplied. Like terms are negative 20x and a positive 48x. So that's going to result in 40x squared plus 28x minus 24. And that's our solution for number 17. Let's move on to the last problem on this worksheet, number 18. First, outside, inside, last, FOIL. What we're going to do is combine our first terms, 8b times 5b, which is a 40b squared. Then our outside terms, 8b and this 5, that's subtracted. So that's 8b times negative 5, which is a negative 40b or minus 40b. Then our inside terms, negative 1 and 5b, which will be, when multiplied, subtracting a 5b. And then lastly, negative 1 and negative 5, which will result in a positive 5, so adding 5. Last step is to combine those like terms in order to simplify. So we're going to have 40b squared minus 45b plus 5. And there we have it. That's how you multiply two binomials. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I or one of your peers will get back to you as soon as we can. If you haven't already, go ahead, click that like button, and leave a comment below. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. All likes and subscriptions are greatly appreciated. Happy learning!